Hi there, good day, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good whatever time of day you happen to be watching this. This is of course the wonderful Nick Dutch broadcasting on the Nick Dutch Videos YouTube channel. Wonderful to be back on the camera again one more time. I've got in my hand a book here which I don't know whether you can see the title there. It's called The Magic Shields and it's by Francis Melville. I just want to use this by way of illustration as to what the occult is not, or what magic really is not. And realistically, it's not everything which is promoted within this particular variety of book. It's not the kind of book which I personally think is good, okay, because it takes every form of attempt to reason away from people. Essentially, it's a collection of folklore, mysticism, and some of these things in this book are actually promoted as if there is some kind of reliable effect that one can gain from using the various techniques and ideas in it. I mean, the section on vampires, for instance, has some passages which even makes it seem like vampires themselves are real objective creatures and there's certain specific ways of basically getting rid of them. My fear is that when anything occult is promoted with such great PR, shall we say, and with no real mention of the fact that this is just folklore, or this is just religious traditions, or this is just essentially for for entertainment, that people do actually get a little bit confused as to what this kind of information is there for. And as a result of that, there'll be people who are being led astray, people who will start to read very widely into things which are basically not true, and basically jump to conclusions above and beyond that which they should be. So the quantity and quality of extrapolation that a person may end up going through when they're dipping into information like that could prevent them from an objective, rational understanding of any form of psychic or paranormal phenomenon. I know I've mentioned this before, but I really think I need to illustrate it. Although there is some hypothetical benefit to the promotion of occult stuff in a fictional sense or in a religious sense or all the rest of that, it doesn't necessarily help because it clouds the message. All we've got, I mean, when you come across someone who's got a strong hard belief in, let's say, witchcraft, in, let's say, out-of-body experiences, there can be a few reasons why they have these strong views. First and foremost, it could be down to reading something which is well presented, but which is essentially, incomplete information. It could be something which is religious, and they're encouraged to accept what they are told. It could be being told them by someone who is religious, so that the person who is listening is then encouraged to believe and to accept because the religious person has forced the idea into them. In all of those cases, there are fictional or belief-orientated sources rather than necessarily an experience. The only other source of a form of belief in something of a supernatural nature is when there is a strange experience which appears to defy the rational mind. It seems to defy reason and logic, and it breaks through what the average individual would assume could be possible under normal circumstances, the way that they think normal circumstances really and truly are. So this is why I think it is more important to try and focus on the strange experiences. When there are people's reports of the strange experiences, they have to be criticized, they have to be challenged and broken down. But the challenge and the criticism might destroy an individual with their argument, but it still can't really say anything about the way in which the natural world actually operates. So the criticism can be useful because it can stop the person who's had the strange experience from developing too many layers of belief, which will then affect their way of looking at the world clearly and truly. Okay, it's like those conspiracy theorists who, because of all their complex politics and the complex strange ideas and things that they feel the need to protect because someone else has told them to protect these things, they get confused and distracted from the real message of there are some things that we can change in the world as individuals and as groups. So the experiences themselves are what is worthwhile aspiring to, because it's these things which will help us to understand ourselves and essentially help us to understand life itself. there is a drive amongst a lot of people to immerse themselves in books of this type, to think, well, there must be some grain of truth in here. And yes, sometimes there is a grain of truth behind what is in the books, but that grain of truth is not really explained. When I was a young man and looking through the writings of Aleister Crowley, there were certain things that I wanted to achieve, certain specific things, but essentially there was no real information as to how to precisely bring these various things about. There was lots of religious ideas, and basically people like Aleister Crowley were trying to convert people to a religion. And we've got to realise that there's a historical importance to that, and a political importance to that, and a cultural, social and ethical importance to those things. But they themselves do not help to understand the strange experiences, or indeed to understand nature. And as such, they've still got to be thrown out the window. I know it can seem rather harsh for me to turn around to you and say that, but essentially, yeah, that is the case. We have to take a lot of the mythology and a lot of the faith-based ideas and put them into perspective, because when it's seen in perspective, it is just a faith-based idea. Okay? But on the other hand, with objectivity, we can look at these things, we can look at these ideas which are coming out of these faith-based cultures, and see whether there's some which we could use as part of our mind-altering exercises, such as through meditation and religious pursuits. Okay? But the distinction still has to be drawn. I still find it very peculiar that there's all these people who use the art and science of change and conformity with the will definition, but they still don't realize that it requires the use of some scientific thought, and indeed demonstrating that they have the ability to think in a more scientific way through their use of language. But instead they don't do that, they use the phrase, "it works." It works, it works, it works, it works, which is a phrase which I am totally overhearing, okay, because it doesn't really help. When someone turns around to you and says it works, it's a proof positive that they have moved away from all form of scientific thought and artistic creative thought, and they've moved towards superstitious thought, which is the antithesis or the opposite, the complete opposite of any form of scientific thought. And sometimes it's because, you know, the way the truth and the light of whatever form of magic it is presented in a manner like this. A very well bound, very good looking book. For people of a certain type, that will be regarded as being a very believable source of information. Alternatively, something like this one, and I showed this to you before, and there's some problems with its reasoning and its explanation as well, and there's lots of claims without necessarily sufficient proof and sufficient evidence to be able to back them up, and we need to just filter through all of that. Gaining inspiration is one thing, but seeing those as being hard and fast strict source books is basically another, if we're trying to be scientific. So when you're doing your scientific thinking, would you turn around to someone and say, oh, it is the spirits which have done this, or it is the fairies which have done that? No, you realistically would not. Alright, and nor would you ever use the phrase, it works. Alright, because that is what is destroying occult culture. It's destroying pagan culture, and it's making people who are interested in everything of an occult and new age nature look like complete losers in my humble estimation. So, we have to get away from that. We can't turn around and use folklore as a means of proving a particular something or other. All we can do is say there's a strange experience. Now, some people actually tell you their strange experiences by way of saying this is proof. Well, no, it's a form of evidence, but what is it evidence of? Okay, make sure we've got that nice and clear in our heads. It's a form of evidence, but what is it evidence of? We don't actually know. And we've got to be honest about that. So many occultists out there just are not. And they want to be religious. And basically when they're trying to convince everyone that such and such an experience is proof of like the old gods or the pagan religion or Christianity or the fact that, I don't know, something or other is believed to be true, therefore, it obviously is. It's bull crap. You've got to stop being like that, One day, all of this research into psychic phenomena, could be turned into something real, okay, something which could help with human communication, could help with improving human health and human understanding, and so on and so forth. But if we carry on being a bunch of half-wits, we're not going to do any good for ourselves or for anybody else on the face of the planet, and it's all going to be pretty ghastly because of the people within all of the religious movements. It's not just a question of the text, it's not just a question of books which look good and which are basically full of rubbish, okay? It's not just a question of this. It's a question of the approach that we make to them, the interpretation we make to them, the words we use when we're describing the content and describing our own experiences, and explaining in clear terms the rationale for our experiences, okay, and the rationale for our interpretation of the experiences, which actually requires something which a lot of people don't have, but we must get it, okay, and we must learn to use it. Now, one of those things is called objectivity. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Good fortune, God bless, and all that jazz.